A 2-year-old boy dies in Mississippi.
Let's be honest, I mean, a 2-year-old is pretty much defenseless. It doesn't take that much force if you're an adult to drown a 2-year-old.
Shortly after, authorities would arrest the toddler's mother for the crime. On June 18th, deputies responded to a 911 call of a disturbance at a local home in Lauderdale County, Mississippi, shortly before 8 p.m. There, authorities made a devastating discovery: the lifeless body of a 2-year-old boy, later identified as Kelly McDevitt Jr. Authorities would arrest Kelly's mother, 35-year-old Adrienne McDevitt, for the shocking murder.
So, in cases of infanticide, the perpetrators tend to almost overwhelmingly always be female, which is not surprising.
At this time, it's unclear what circumstances led to the toddler's murder. According to Lauderdale County Sheriff Ward Calhoun, the initial 911 call reported a disturbance about a domestic dispute. However, by the time deputies arrived, the two individuals had been separated. While investigators await the results of the autopsy to determine the exact cause of death, Sheriff Calhoun made it clear there was enough evidence to arrest the young boy's mom for her son's murder.
Well, I was going to say that, it is early, and so we shouldn't condemn this woman yet because we don't really know what happened. It could have been an accident. But in these types of cases, very often it is the mother becoming overwhelmed by the responsibility of motherhood. And she may have had an angry moment and just gone too far. We just don't know. It's still too early to tell yet.
According to the Lauderdale County Sheriff, their initial evidence is leading them to believe the boy drowned forcibly, allegedly at the hands of his mother.
Let's be honest. I mean, a 2-year-old is pretty much defenseless. It doesn't take that much force if you're an adult to drown a 2-year-old. But as I said, with the newborn, very often it's an unwanted child. And so that's a reason very often that mothers will murder them. But in an infant, sometimes it's just they're overwhelmed. They had a moment where the infant was inconsolable, and so they did this out of rage. It's very difficult to know. And again, if alcohol and drugs are involved, during the period of pregnancy, now you have an infant which is very difficult to quiet down, to pacify, combined with someone who's a substance user. But again, we don't know any of that right now. It's still too early.
During a press conference with local outlets, Sheriff Calhoun became visibly teary-eyed as he recounted the scene. He said in part, quote, "This is certainly a tragic event for this family and our community. I would ask the citizens of our community who are faithful, praying people to pray for this family and our department." This is another Law and Crime legal alert. Have you experienced severe gastroparesis or other side effects after taking Ozempic or another GLP-1 weight loss medication? The Ozempic lawsuits allege that the drug can lead to severe intestinal blockage and persistent vomiting, and that manufacturers allegedly failed to provide adequate warning about these risks. True Law, one of our legal sponsors, is helping those injured file a claim through an experienced attorney who helps ensure your claim is thoroughly presented. Visit www.glp1case.com/LC News to answer less than 10 questions and check your eligibility to file a claim. At this time, many details around the case remain a mystery, including how and why did this happen?
Well, obviously, there's a lot we don't know. When I saw this case, it reminded me of other cases where kids had been killed, like Susan Smith and Andrea Yates. We know that neonaticides versus infanticides have very different offender characteristics. So, for example, mothers who kill infants often have a history of psychiatric problems, although not the majority of the time. It's still a risk factor. Substance use may be involved. They tend to be older than people who commit neonaticides. But again, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of these types of cases of neonaticides that aren't reported. So it's difficult to know because there aren't that many cases that have been studied relative to the number that have actually occurred.
Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Bober explains cases where mothers are accused of killing their own children isn't a unique phenomenon.
So I actually see it more often than a lot of people would believe. And I think because society tells mothers that they should be happy and joyful, I don't think it really allows them room to show any ambivalence or show any stress about having a child. And a lot of them, believe it or not, actually have thoughts of wanting to harm their children, but many of them are afraid to speak up because of the obvious legal implications. It's not abnormal for a first-time mother, for example, to feel absolutely overwhelmed by having a child. It's just a lot to take on. Plus, you combine that with the hormonal changes. I think this is something that a lot of people don't really understand, but it's definitely out there, and it's definitely something that they have to deal with. So, in cases of infanticide, the perpetrators tend to almost overwhelmingly always be female, which is not surprising. They tend to be older than the ones who commit neonaticide, and they also tend to be married. So it is interesting to note, if she was married, how her husband or how her partner played into this. Was it a fight that they had? Were they fighting over the fact that he never helps with the child? We just don't know. It's still too early.
While investigators noted they were called out to McDevitt's home due to a domestic disturbance, it's unclear at this time if the argument was between McDevitt and her husband. After authorities made the horrific discovery, McDevitt was taken to a local hospital, but investigators have not revealed why she was taken to the hospital.
A lot of mothers who kill their children, some people believe it's actually a suicidal impulse, meaning if I take you out of this world or I take myself out, who's going to look out for you? So I'm going to take you out and then I'm going to take myself out, right? So maybe there was some kind of event where she tried to harm herself and she needed to go to the hospital for either medical or psychiatric clearance. I will be curious to see what happens with that. Did she harm the child and then try to harm herself? That's my question.
So could postpartum have played a factor into the case? Dr. Bober explains at this time it's too unclear to tell.
It would be a little bit late to be postpartum. I mean, it's still possible, but it would be very late for that. And again, if that were the case, there might be a history of psychiatric problems. Maybe she visited a psychiatrist. We know that it is normal for women to get the blues after pregnancy. Probably 2 or 3 out of 10 have that. Postpartum depression is a little bit more rare. And then, of course, postpartum psychosis, as I had brought up the Andrea Yates case, was something that occurred where she had drowned several of her children. So it's difficult to know what's happening in a case like this. But again, I would want to know things like, what were her behaviors like prior to the incident? Who did she come into contact with? Did she have a history of mental health problems? Did she have a history of substance use problems? Who else was present in the home? These are all things that I would want to know.
McDevitt's Facebook page is flooded with loving and doting photos of her and her son. But according to Dr. Bober, social media may only show one side of the story.
As a psychiatrist who's been practicing about 20 years, I like to use the term Facebook fallacy or Instagram illusion. People often put their best foot forward on social media. You see them with their baby bumps, with their wedding pictures, with their ski trips. But the truth is that a lot of people are really suffering. And they find it necessary to put these pictures up there, to put their best foot forward like they have it all together, because showing any sign of weakness or any sign of struggle is just not acceptable in our society. So I don't go a lot by what people post on social media, because again, it tends to be, a very crafted image, and they're engaging in what I like to call impression management. They want people to think that they're living this completely happy life that's free of stress, but we know the truth is very different, because we all have our own struggles, right? And so a lot of times people aren't authentic when they post things on social media.
McDevitt was ultimately released from the hospital and now remains behind bars. As authorities continue their investigation and await the results of the toddler's autopsy, it will now be up to a grand jury to determine how the case will move forward. Online records show Adrienne McDevitt is still being held behind bars in the Lauderdale County Jail on a $500,000 bond. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.